Ladies, guys, we're going to stay up here. It'll be a good time to talk about, well, girls are going to talk about girl stuff. Guys are going to talk about guy stuff. I don't plan on talking about girl stuff up here. The girls might talk about guy stuff. Well, they can talk about whatever they want. But before we do that, though, we're going to talk about a couple quick things up here that are pretty important. Go ahead and hit that first slide for me. Tonight's called the battles of our sex instead of the battle of the sexes. There are certain things that guys battle with. They're not completely exclusive to guys, but by and large there are things that we deal with just as guys, and then there are a number of issues that just girls deal with. It's not that guys can't struggle with them, we do, but we're going to cover those things in, I don't want to call it class. You're going to be hanging out. Girls, Kate's got a cool setup for y'all downstairs. Again, guys, we're going to hang out up here. But just a real fast couple of things I want to review before we jump into that. Who made sex? God and Jesus. Both of those answers are acceptable answers. Yes, very good. The reason why that is important is because why? Why is it important that God made sex?
So we can reproduce.
Okay, yes, there are 3 P's to sexual, no. Yeah. There are 3 P's why God made sex. Number 1 is procreation. Number 2 is pleasure. Number 3 is, protection. And not like, not protection as in like condoms. I mean, like married people protect one another. Okay? So those are the 3 P's as far as sex goes with God. But they're actually, the 2 big reasons, or the 2 big deals about God creating sex means that God, number 1, God knows how to do it best because it was His invention. Just like if you made a car, or actually it was Cooper, you made a brand new controller, right?
Oh, yeah.
Yes, you brand new controller. And only you knew how to use it properly because it was your invention, okay?
Yeah,
This
actually a controller like that now.
Good. Just come up with something else. Make your own thing. All right? But because sex is God's invention, that means He gets to tell us how to use it best. He knows how it's best to operate. He knows how we can enjoy it at the maximum level. That's why we call it sex to the max. But also, it means that God gets to make the rules when it comes to sex. And both of those are really important factors. There's other things I wanted to review. We don't have the time. But I do want to talk to you about hormones a little bit tonight. Okay? It's not like I said the word penis. Calm down. There you go. Hormones are not a big word. Check this out, okay? Let's go ahead and go to the next slide. The most important sexual organ of our body is what, do you think? Do what? The heart, private parts. Somebody will take a guess? The brain, very good. It's the brain, yeah, absolutely. Learned some cool stuff about the brain today. There are 85 billion neurons in your brain, which is roughly the exact same amount of stars that are in our solar system. Isn't that kind of cool to think about? There are many neurons in your brain, even those of you that we might suggest are brain dead. Nobody in here actually is. 85 billion neurons in your brain, and they are operating at speeds of up to 260 miles per hour. That's how fast they're transferring information, not only all over your brain, but all over your body. Which is pretty amazing too. Other cool facts about the brain, there are 5 trillion chemical reactions happening every second in your body. That's pretty amazing. Your brain monitors and regulates your actions. That's not necessarily new information to you. But what you do need to know about your brain, if you didn't know this already, is depending on what kind of actions you take in your life, you can literally change the way that your brain operates. The neural pathways in your brain. You can rewire your brain to where it doesn't work the way it's supposed to. And one of the fastest ways for that to happen is the hormones we're going to talk about tonight. So check this out. The first one is called oxytocin. And it's a pretty interesting chemical. Okay, can you help me out there? There, oh, awesome. No, I'm sorry. We're going to talk about the prefrontal cortex first. There we go. Okay? Prefrontal cortex. Anybody know in there, besides what it says on the screen, I know what what do you got?
It's our decision-making part.
Very good. Yes. Something interesting about prefrontal cortex when it comes to teenagers. And actually, this is not just teenagers. This is true of humankind. It's not fully developed. Very good. Yes, in fact, it's the last. We could say this is a mean trick on God's part. Obviously, God has a reason for doing this. But it is the last part of your brain to form. Now, think about that. The last part of your brain to form is the part of your brain that helps you make solid long-term decisions. by and large, seniors, what are we asking you to do with your lives right now? Make long-term decisions. What do you want to do with your life? You're only 17. Go! Doesn't really make a whole lot of sense, does it? And actually, we don't start when you're 17. You guys at young, people are already saying, what do you want to do with your life? Go! Right? Totally. Does that make any sense? No, not really. Okay? So your prefrontal cortex, yes, it helps you with your long-term decision making. It also does a couple of other interesting things that's fun. It helps you form judgments, specifically what you consider to be right or wrong. Okay, that sounds pretty important, right? And also, it's the thing that controls your social behavior. So if you go to school with anybody that you think is like a total nut job, it could be that they're a total nut job, or it could be just their brain's not done cooking yet, and check back with them in 10 years and they'll be normal, right? But it's the part of teenage brains that think, I should drive really fast right now, or I should, do the craziest thing I can imagine, or I should eat all of these, Oreos in this one box. So, things that sound fun, and they are fun, but really in the long run, they're not good decisions. And if you just had somebody intercede in your life that would say, hey, stop, it would be very, very helpful. So that's your prefrontal cortex. And the last thing you need to know, again, is for all of you in the room, chances are very good you're not done growing your prefrontal cortex. Yes, that's pretty important information. Now, look at this next thing. Oxytocin hormone, okay? It's nicknamed the love hormone. Yeah, there actually is a hormone in your body that helps you feel love. And it's pretty cool. Okay? Oxytocin is in both guys and girls. And it happens for guys and girls under the following circumstances. Like if you actually reach out and hold somebody's hand, in your body, guys, and in your bodies, girls, oxytocin is released specifically in your brain, and it makes you feel what you consider to be love. It's the feeling part of love, right? And every time you continue to touch somebody, in fact, the more involved that touching gets, the greater the amount of oxytocin that's released in your body, all right? Now, again, it happens in guys and girls, but girls, you're more susceptible to oxytocin than you guys are. Boys, we have another one we're going to talk about in a second called Vasopressin. We'll get there in a second. But girls, here's what you know about oxytocin. There are 3 times in your life when massive doses of oxytocin are released in your body. Number 1, did somebody say your period? No. No. There's a lot of other hormones going on there, but not your period. No. 3 times. Oxytocin is dumped into your brain whenever you give birth. Whenever you give birth. Now, why do you suppose God would dump a chemical in your brain when you give birth in your body that makes you love something? Hang on. Yes, to love your child. Girls. Did you say that too? Absolutely, yeah. And think about this just logically. From what you know about childbirth, it sounds pretty painful, right? Generally speaking, when somebody causes you pain, are you prone to love them? No. No, you're prone to hate them and want to get away from them. And yet, God does this amazing things in your bodies that this little human that has caused you the most pain you'll ever feel in your entire life, they come out and you're like, I love it, it's beautiful, yay! And it's amazing. It is a physical feeling that you feel, and it's a result of oxytocin. That's cool. So that's number 1. Number 2 is when you breastfeed. Yeah, and it happens every time you breastfeed. So just so you know, you have to breastfeed a baby every 2 to 3 hours. So every 2 to 3 hours, oxytocin is dumped into your brain. Now, how many of you have, or at least you remember this, when mom and dad had a baby in their house? Awesome. Okay. So by and large, especially in that first couple months, is mom particularly happy? I mean, yes and no. Like, she's probably the most tired she's ever been in her entire life. And again, when we're tired, do we tend to love people? Not really. But check it out. This is amazing. Every time you breastfeed, God dumps this, and it's not just, this is the way God designed our bodies. God dumps a load of oxytocin in your brain, and so literally, as you're breastfeeding, it's designed this way, you're breastfeeding, you're holding the baby, you're almost forced to look at it, and you're falling in love again and again and again with this little person that you're holding. It's an amazing deal. Yeah? And then the final time is every time you have sex. Okay? God dumps a massive amount of oxytocin into your brain so that person that you're having sex with, you feel those feelings of love with. Now, think about these in these terms. In a marriage context, does that sound helpful? Absolutely. In a non-marriage context, does that sound helpful? Not particularly. Pardon me. Especially consider the possibility that on average, people your age right now, before they get married, are having 4 to 5 sexual partners. On average. Yeah. Does that sound helpful? No, not at all. Yeah. So, hold those thoughts. Let's go to the next one. I want to tell you a story about 2 mice. Okay? And I put up, these are not the 2 mice. It actually, you guys ever watch BBC? The only thing of BBC that I ever watch is their nature programs. And they do incredible jobs in their nature programs. My kids and I, we love them. My kids especially. So the BBC in 2008 did a study on 2 different type of field mice. And one particular type of field mice, they were monogamous. You don't know what monogamy means? It means they only had relations with one person. Yes, mice have sex. Okay? But then another type of field mice that was very similar to this particular other kind of field mice, they called this particular mouse a playboy mouse. Like he was just running around and just had sex with anything and anybody that would allow him to. And they were wondering, what is so different about these 2 mice? So they were testing this hormone called vasopressin. And we've known about vasopressin for decades, but they're finding out really in the last 10 years everything else that vasopressin does, specifically to the male body. And so they took some extra vasopressin and they injected it into the playboy mouse. And all of a sudden, that mouse that was running around just having sex with everything stopped doing that and only had sex with one other mouse. It turned the mouse monogamous. And even the folks over at the BBC, which by the way is by and large not even remotely Christian country, they said, wow, that's pretty interesting. And then they started studying the effects of vasopressin in the male brain, in the actual human brain, and it turns out, looky there, every time a guy has sex, vasopressin is dumped into their head, and what vasopressin does is it leads to males feeling a strong sense of monogamy, strong sense of loyalty, even jealousy for that particular young lady that they've just had sex with. Now again, in a marriage context, does that sound helpful? Definitely so. Outside of a marriage context, does that sound helpful? If you're feeling jealousy for 4 or 5 girls and then the one that you're married to as well, does that sound like a problem? If you're feeling bonded, and it's actually called pair bonding, that's the scientific term for it. If you're pair bonded to 4 or 5 other people, including the person that you're married to, does that sound like a pretty big problem? Absolutely. So we're going to break into our groups and we're going to talk about how our hormones affect us, but also, again, just some guy and girl stuff. But I want you to know about these hormones, again, just to see, not only did God make sex like, you know, the body parts and the fun stuff, but even the stuff that goes on in your brain. God really did something incredible when it came to the sex thing. So, girls, y'all head downstairs. Y'all going to go downstairs to the...
If anybody has any comments or questions at any time, just raise your hand, and I'll do my best to be kind of looking around and catch those. But don't be shy. This is a judge-free zone. And so with that, we'll start. So first of all of you are all beautiful. God made man and woman on the 6th day, and he said it was very good. That isn't just for Adam and Eve. God meant that the human race he created is very good. God sees us, and all he sees is his very good creation. God made each and every one of you, and he is the greatest artist. You are a work of art, and you are fearfully and wonderfully made, having been knit together in your mother's womb. So tonight we're going to discuss a little bit about guys and girls' differences, modesty, porn, and a little bit about sex. So don't check out. Hopefully this will not be like the same old you guys have heard growing up. So we'll start with guys and girls, like their differences. What are some obvious differences between guys and girls? Okay, raise your hand. Just shoot them off.
Different genders.
Yes. Facial features. Yeah. What else? What are some differences between guys and girls?
Genitalia.
Yes.
Girls
Very
are better
different.
Yeah.
What else? What about like the way
How they
act or react or think? Yes.
Females are usually more mature than males.
more stupid stuff than women.
I mean, yes. It depends on the guy. Like, that's not like every guy is dumb. That's not what we're trying to get at.
Sure.
They may act like it, and you might seem like that now, and that's because, like, again, just like you just said, they haven't developed it. And you guys too. You guys are not excluded. Sometimes you do things that are not super smart thought out. Anyway, yes, one more.
Aside from like feminism and like women power and everything, guys tend to like lead more, and women like they tend to want power more.
Yeah. So yes, they tend to want power more, but also like, and this is a thing. I'm sorry if like this offends any of you, but guys and men are called to lead their families and wives. That is a thing, and they should be able to do that. That is their job, and that's what God is calling them to do. Anyway, so in the terms of like relationships, like hopefully this little list that I have will help you understand your guy friends, and hopefully your boyfriends or husbands later on. So first is girls are all about relationships, right? We like value relationships very, very much. Guys are a little bit more physical. They value physical touch a little bit more. We are very verbal. Do you guys ever like try and talk to guys sometimes and it just like goes over their head? We are very, very verbal creatures, right? So we like to talk. Guys are visual. They're visual thinkers, and they are turned on by what they see. Sorry. What kind of movies do we like? Romance movies. Horror. If we're talking, hang on, guys. If we're talking about differences in guys and girls like romance a little bit more than guys do, and guys like action a little bit more than girls do. Of course, there's like a few that are probably like, no, that's totally wrong. But I'm talking about like the general consensus here. Girls like chivalry. We like to have the doors open for us and just other like chivalrous things. And guys have to learn chivalry. Sorry.
What is chivalry?
Guys being nice to girls because they think they're pretty.
Alright, next one is that we feel emotion. We are very emotional creatures. That's how God has made us. Guys think emotion. They have to sit there and think, okay, how does this make me feel? Whereas we immediately go, just in tears, running out the room. Like, that is just what we do. The last one I have for you is that we have a very slow sex drive. Guys have a very fast sex drive.
Okay.
That doesn't change. In our marriage counseling, something Mr. Ed Lamance said to us was, girls are like crock pots and guys are like light switches. So that just kind of gives you an idea. So next up, what I'm going to talk about is modesty. Everyone's favorite subject. The definition of modest is having or showing regard for the decency of behavior, speech, dress, and etc. It's not just clothing. And the definition of modesty is freedom from vanity, boastfulness, etc. Vanity is defined as excessive pride in one's appearance, qualities, abilities, achievements, etc. When God made women, He made us to have curves. There should not be and is not any shame in a woman having curves because, again, God made us that way. Our bodies themselves are not inherently distracting or even tempting. It proclaims the glory of the Lord. So what should modesty mean to us? Should it just be dressing to cover all the special parts of your body or to keep our brothers from stumbling, or because TJ and I tell you that you should? I believe that modesty starts deep in the heart. Timothy 2:9-10 says, I also want a woman to dress modestly, with decency and propriety, not with braided hair or gold or pearls or expensive clothes, but with good deeds appropriate for a woman who professes to worship God. We're going to focus on the last few words of those verses, which says, profess to worship God. Our modesty, the way we present ourselves through behavior, speech, and yes, even our clothes, should reflect that we love and worship God. It all boils down to who we are trying to impress. Are you trying to catch the eye of the cute boy in the youth group, or to point others towards people try to define modesty as hiding the parts of us that make us female, wearing ill-fitting clothes all the time, like really just ill-fitting clothes. We shouldn't have to be embarrassed for our bodies, but we should protect what is special, saving them for someone special. Just like we carefully store away precious jewelry or other valuables so they aren't stolen. Do you leave your phones and laptops in the car, like on the dashboard? No. Because you want to protect those things because they're special to you. And while it isn't our job to keep boys from lusting, it is good to honor the boys in our lives, to not intentionally try to cause them to look and lust. It is on the boys to control their eyes. And modesty occurs when we make ourselves central and in charge of our lives instead of God. I'm not going to stand here or sit here and give you a list of rules to follow and then you'll be considered modest. That just doesn't work. I will say that God is in charge of your life. Things will be off, including our modesty, in all areas, which is behavior, speech, and dress. So enough about modesty. Now we're going to talk about sex. Some things I want you to know about sex. Sex is good, ladies. Sex is great. I can say that because I'm married. If it wasn't good and fun, God wouldn't be concerned with whether or not we wait until marriage. Understand? TJ taught that sex between a man and a woman forms a permanent bond between them. God planned it that way. He wants a husband and a wife to be bonded together for life. It is his plan. When we sleep around, we have all these bonds formed, and when the relationships end, that bond is torn, and it's not just a clean break. There's always damage. It's just sex is a lie. Someone always gets hurt every single time. Another thing TJ has emphasized is 1 Corinthians 7:4. The wife's body does not belong to her alone, but also to her husband. In the same way, the husband's body does not belong to him alone, but also to his wife. I'm sorry, I'm reading really fast, and my words are combining. So just hang on with me.
You're good.
Your body isn't yours, even right now. It is God's first, and someday, maybe, it will belong to your husband. Let me take this time to say that it is quite possible some of you in this room won't get married. And that's okay. We teach abstinence because whether or not you get married, it will likely be something you deal with at some point. I read an article a couple weeks ago, and the title of it was 4 Lies the Church Taught Me About Sex. I want to address the 4 issues so you're not taught incorrectly. The first one that I read was physical touch leads to sex. While the author felt this was a lie, it is true. Holding hands doesn't mean that you'll have intercourse tomorrow. But like TJ has said, holding hands is good for a while, and then you want to move forward to get those butterflies in your stomach feeling. I understand that, I really do. But we need to guard our hearts and minds from the lies the enemy will feed you. And if you don't hold hands or sit really close or whatever you're doing, that you're a freak. That's not true. God wants to protect you, and that's why he's so strict about this issue. In the end, the one that gets hurt from sex, or anything leading up to sex, is you. The second thing is if you wait, you'll have mind-blowing sex on your wedding night. This one is false. What would be so good about sex? What would be so good about sex if the best you ever had was on your wedding night? And that was it. That was the best one. And then you have to live the rest of your life. Your first time will be awkward. But that's okay, because if you're married, you have a lifetime to practice and perfect things, and then it'll be mind-blowing. The third thing is girls don't care about sex. That's a ridiculous thought. God made men and women both to be sexual beings and to enjoy sex. And if he didn't want us to care, he himself wouldn't care what we did. And then the fourth thing, and last thing, condemnation for those who are in Jesus Christ. Because through Christ Jesus, the law of the Spirit set me free from the law of sin and death. We are forgiven for our past mistakes. Protecting your heart and mind from ungodly things now will hopefully decrease any guilt or shame you may take with you into marriage. So, look at this way. When we're born, we receive like a really big wooden chest. You know, like the really big ones that would sit at the end of your bed? You got that idea? Okay. So through your life, you collect things, sin and joy, as you grow up. And when you get married, you bring your chest along with you. Now, think about the things that you're collecting. Do you want to bring a chest full of guilt and shame with you when you get married? Or do you want a light chest that you can fill with joy in your marriage? That's what baggage is. If you think, okay, people say, well, I have all this baggage. That's baggage. And trust me, you don't want a chest full of guilt sitting at the end of you and your husband's bed after you get married, because there's a lot less room for joy.
Can I interject something also?
Yeah.
Even if you are completely pure up until your wedding night, depending on what you've been taught about sex, you can also have guilt and shame. Like, you've been told your whole life, no, don't do this. And all of a sudden it's okay. There isn't that switch that's like, oh, okay, we're good now.
Yeah.
It's hard. And so that's why we're trying to teach you guys, sex is a good thing. I mean, in like many different respects. I want you guys to know now, it's such a gift to share with your husband. And we don't want you thinking, oh man, it's dirty, it's nasty, it's like the biggest sin you could ever commit before marriage, because it's no worse than any other sin, honestly, if you have sex before you get married. But I do want you to know that there is such joy when you get to share this gift with your husband for the rest of your life. And it's not going to be amazing your first night, okay? Which is good, because like Kate said, you don't want it to be the best the first, and then you're like, it's okay, like the rest of my life. You want it to be like, okay, that was a little awkward, it was a little weird. We're going to get better, it's going to be okay. Okay, so sex is good. Sex is a good thing in the right context.
Yes. I agree.
She has a question.
Yes.
You had said that not everybody gets married, but if not everybody gets married and you're saying that sex is so great, then why don't we get to have it if you don't ever get married?
So
Does that
some
feel wrong?
people just don't want to get married and they don't want to go through that, and they don't want to experience it. And some of them don't get to. Some of us pass before that happens, and some of us commit to a life full of abstinence, like nuns do. That's their entire life. Their life is devoted to Jesus Christ. And so they abstain from those things. They abstain from marriage. Yeah. Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Alrighty, now we're going to talk about porn.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. So, we're going to go back into kind of some scientific, chemical kind of things. So, there's a thing called dopamine. It's a neurotransmitter that is central in our drive for personal reward. When teenagers take part in stimulating or potentially addictive habits such as pornography, there is a flood of dopamine in the brain. With repetitive increases of dopamine released in the teen's brain, it is rewired to crave the same effect. So, that to say, yes.
Will you define pornography real fast before we get too deep into this?
Yes, I had it somewhere. Hang on. I'm gonna look it up to give you a very precise definition. Okay, pornography or porn usually refers to representations designed to arouse and give sexual pleasures to those who read, see, hear, or handle them. So, anything that stimulates you in any of those ways. And we're also going to be talking about emotional porn. So, just stay tuned for that.
We'll get there. We'll get there.
Wow, yeah. the most sensitive to dopamine around age 15 to 19 and react up to 4 times more strongly to images perceived as exciting. A teen's brain is at its peak of dopamine production and neuroplasticity, making it highly vulnerable to addiction and rewiring as their brain is not yet finished developing. So these addictions that you are making now are going to be harder to break going into your lives. Yes?
One, dopamine sounds like a type of drug, and two, so is dopamine kind of like nicotine in a way?
Dopamine is it's technically a drug because it is a chemical that your brain is going through. And it kind of is like that.
It's
So nicotine and things like that would give the same kind of chemical reaction of cravings and addiction.
Dopamine is like a happy.
It's like they
It is a happy
hormone.
Yeah, it is a happy hormone. So when you are smoking like things like nicotine and other chemicals that are addictive, your brain secretes dopamine and makes that wired connection. That's the chemical that creates addiction. All right. So, survey puts the number of Christian girls who struggle with porn somewhere around 10 to 20%. That means for every 10 of you reading or listening to me right now, at least 1 and maybe 2 of you struggle with pornography. If you're one of those girls, please know this. You are not alone. It is astonishing that for however many women struggle with pornography, almost all of the girls and women who have talked to me believe that they are alone. It is something so commonly discussed among men, but rarely, if ever, mentioned among women. Just because we don't talk about it doesn't mean that we don't struggle. And you are not beyond grace. One of the most hopeful things to me while reading about Jesus' time on earth is seeing the woman that he interacted with. Sometimes women may feel dirty or completely unable to be loved by God because they struggle with sexual sins. Yet, when you read of the women Jesus encountered in the Gospels, a vast majority of them are sexual sinners. What you have done or doing is not beyond the reach of grace, of the love of Christ. You have not sinned beyond the cross. The most dangerous and toxic lie you can believe is that God no longer loves you. You might imagine that God is looking at you with just disgust, turning his ear from your prayers and turning his back on you entirely. You feel that you let him down. You'll stop reading your Bible because you don't see the point. You'll stop going to church because you feel like a hypocrite. You think that there is no way God wants anything to do with you. This isn't the gospel or the reality of grace. In Romans 5:18 it says, "But God shows his love for us in that while we were still sinners, Christ died for us." God's love for you is not contingent upon your success in overcoming your struggles. He loves you enough to die for you and longs to help you fight this battle. Quit believing you have to earn his love by breaking free on your own. He has come to set captives free and to break the power of sin in your life, but things can't happen if you are pushing him away. He longs to heal any wounds and give you an abundant life. Quit believing that you are beyond his reach. There is hope for you. Hope that you can have victory over your struggle. Find healing and live a life renewed by grace. So now we're going to talk about emotional porn. Because a lot of you, how many of you think you know what emotional porn means? No? Who has seen the TV show called The Bachelor? Raise your hands. Yes? Alright. If you don't know anything about this show, it's a reality show that follows a good-looking young man in his attempt to win an eligible bachelorette to be his bride. Presented with a harem of girls to choose from, he spends the remainder of his time on the show romancing, seducing, making out with, leading on and emotionally bonding, having sex with each of these single ladies, all the while sorting through which one will ultimately be the love of his life, usually after making out with a different one the night before. That just screams true love, doesn't it?
Yes, definitely.
Whenever I'm asked to give my opinion on this kind of entertainment, be it TV, movies, books, any kind of entertainment, answer is typically communicated with 2 words: emotional porn. So what is emotional porn? While I'm in no way trying to get legalistic about the things we can and can't watch as Christians, I typically, or really believe that there are concepts to the idea of emotional porn that sting because they get to the heart of an underlying issue that tends to get ignored. To get a good understanding of what I mean, let's first take a look at the concept of sexual porn and its negative effects. Sexual pornography is defined by taking sexual acts out of their proper context and displaying them in unrealistic ways to satisfy a selfish pleasure. It involves setting up an individual to live within the walls of fantasy, becoming aroused by people, situations, and things that don't really exist. It fuses a person's physical response to unrealistic expectations, poisoning the mind and in turn the heart. I know as Christians we tend to put sexual lust at the top of list of sins. In my community growing up, movies and TV shows with any sign of a sex scene were put on the blacklist. But what if our emotional response is just as much of a part of our sexual purity as our physical response? What if we focus so much on sexual lust that we fail to acknowledge the role of emotional lust? Because the same poison can impact our emotional world as well. Remember how I told you girls are emotional creatures, and we value emotions a lot more than touch and feel? Okay, just checking in and making sure we remember that. So, what if what we watch can feed into the heart of the lies of unrealistic expectations, causing us to live in a fantasy world? What if the movies, books, and TV shows we watch are entertained by are actually causing us to become emotionally aroused by people, situations, and things that don't really exist? What if we're creating both unrealistic and unhealthy expectations of love and romances with the things we call entertainment? Maybe it's time to reconsider the things we are allowing to enter our minds and influence our hearts. Maybe it's time to take an inventory of what we are actually allowing ourselves to soak up. So, the most dangerous thing about both emotional and sexual pornography is that when we live inside the walls of fantasy, we are set up for failure within our reality. We begin to redefine our standards of love and affection by measuring the stick of lust and pleasure. We begin to place unhealthy and unrealistic expectations on ourselves and on our partners, and slowly sink into the pit of discouragement and discontent with reality. I'm sorry, but your relationship isn't going to be like The Notebook. It's not going to. That's a huge example of emotional porn and what I'm talking about. Chick flicks are fun, but they're emotional porn. It's like trying to enjoy a piece of fruit after devouring a bunch of candy. All of a sudden, what used to be sweet loses its sweetness. What used to be satisfying loses its ability to satisfy. The natural world begins to lose its appeal. And at the end of the day, just like you can't survive on a bunch of candy, you can never live abundantly within the world of fantasy. Reality will always win. You were created to enjoy emotional and sexual pleasures in the context of real life within the walls of a real relationship. Don't numb your God-given senses by giving into momentary pleasures. And then I just want to leave you with saying that it's hard to wait for sex. And it's really hard. It's one of the hardest battles I've had to fight, but it's totally worth waiting for. Dare I say, the waiting can be made a little easier when we use these years to find our value in Christ. It's really easy to try and find who we are in something or someone else. Guys, school, appearance, being accepted, etc. We suffer from low self-esteem and lowering our standards for a boyfriend/husband when we try and find who we are without Christ. But God is patiently waiting for us to find who we are in Him, to spend time in His words and in prayer. He is faithful to speak to us. I want you to know that I'm always here if you need somebody to talk to and you don't want to go to someone like your parents. If not me, then another trusted adult. Becca's here. There's several women that are more than get nothing else out of this night, please, please, please know that you are all beautiful and worthy of love. Song of Solomon 4:7 says, "All beautiful you are, my darling, there is no flaw in you. You are worth the wait." And that's all I have for you tonight. Do you have any comments or questions?
Oh, good job.
No? All right. Thank you all for listening.